Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, hope you're all doing well. We have something a little bit different for you today. We're going to be looking at the most expensive cards from original Ravnica, and we're going to be tier listing them out as it were. We're going to be tearing them out on are they worth it for their money, and also a little bit for the vibes, how do I actually feel about these cards. All these prices are right at time of recording. We're taking the rankings from MTG stocks, they get their numbers from TCG Player and Magic Card Market. I'm not affiliated with any of those, and also, this is not financial advice, do whatever you want with your money, I'm not your dad. Line goes up, line goes down, all that stuff. But let's jump into it. So first up, we have a card that will definitely come down in price in the next couple of days. We have Copy Enchantment. 2 in a blue for an enchantment. As Copy Enchantment comes into play, you may choose an enchantment in play. If you do, Copy Enchantment comes in as a copy of that enchantment. So the main reason this is expensive is Commander. That'll be a theme as we go through this series. Shockingly, this sees plays in a lot of enchantment-based decks, where you have some big, dumb, powerful enchantments, and you want to double up those effects. In terms of decks, it mainly sees play in like Lindell, Cheerful Tormentor, like Cursed Tribal decks, where basically this is just a copy of the best enchantment in play, or it also sees play in like Zer the Enchanter enchantment-style decks, where it's normally coming down as a copy of a enchantment that buffs up the creature equal to the number of enchantments you have in play, something like All That Glitters. It's a cool card, it's a fun effect, it's not super unique, so for me, we're going to start off in the C with Copy Enchantment. Another reason for this is that it's just about to get reprinted in Ravnica Remastered, meaning this price will shoot down monumentally. Right, next up, we have a 2-mana 7/7. We have Hunted Horror. It is a creature horror with trample, and now comes the downside. When Hunted Horror comes into play, put 2 3/3 green centaur creature tokens with protection from black into play under target opponent's control. So this is another Commander card, and this is a bit of a weird one again, because there's a reprint of this from one of the Commander Legends that is like pennies compared to the original printing, which is actually fairly expensive. So this is a card you want, make sure you buy the reprint version, not the original. In terms of decks it actually goes into, the first place is like horror type or matters decks, so you have things like Captain Nurgathrod. Horrors isn't the most supported archetype, so you're going to run as many as you can. The other place this will see play is decks that basically want as many copies of Phyrexian Dreadnought as possible. This card is also a lot cheaper than Phyrexian Dreadnought, so that is something to consider in those as well. Decks like Valroz or Lazav, in those decks this is just a 2-mana 7/7. It is the raw stat line that those decks care about. There's no drawback in those at all. I guess this could also see play in like forced combat style of decks where you're like goading everyone's creatures, so the 3/3s you give to an opponent aren't coming at you. That could be pretty cool there. I actually quite like Hunted Horror. I think it's a cool card. Vibes wise, 2-mana 7/7, can't go too far wrong with that. The Ravnica version is a bit too expensive, but the reprint is nice and cheap. Oh, we're putting this in the A. I like this one. Alright, next up, one of the most iconic Magic cards of all time, we have the Ravnica printing of Birds of Paradise. What do I really need to say about Birds of Paradise? It's one of the most iconic cards. You have like the saying, Bolt the Bird. All about this card. It's just really, really good. This card has been printed in alpha. Actually, how many times has this card been printed? 47 times. This card has been printed 47 times, and it's still the 7th most expensive card from Ravnica. It was the first set with this particular art, so maybe that's the thing that people want more than anything else. But Birds of Paradise can just go into so many decks. If you have a Commander deck with green, you're probably running Birds of Paradise if you have one. You'll want it more if you're in a more multicolored deck, but this is fine in a mono green deck as well. This card is still a staple in a ton of cubes as well. Birds of Paradise is awesome. I'm assuming it's probably fallen off in terms of constructed formats just because we've had things like Ignoble Hierarch recently. We've had things like Delighted Halfling. Those cards are very, very strong. And they both have additional value in the decks that was probably going to be running Birds of Paradise. I'm thinking like a Jundi-style shell. But Birds of Paradise is just iconic. It can't go anywhere else. Birds of Paradise is an easy A. Next up, we have a card that I thought was super cheap, if I'm honest with you. Next up, we have Breath of Fury. It is 2 red for Enchantment Aura. Enchant creature you control. When enchanted creature deals combat damage to a player, sacrifice it and attach Breath of Fury to a creature you control. If you do, untap all creatures you control after this phase. There is an additional combat phase. So this is not a card I realized it got this expensive. I guess I got mine around the time in 2016, which is quite a while ago now. But yeah, so many decks just want extra combat steps now, and while we do tend to get extra combat cards once or twice a year in the Commander products, Breath of Fury is a little bit unique in that if you combine it with a commander that's making a creature when it attacks, you basically have unlimited combat steps. I think I originally played this card in the Locust God, where you're making so many 1/1 flying tokens that basically you win the game when this card is out. Actually, especially in Locust God, where you combine it with cards that when you deal combat damage to play, you draw a card, you're making so many tokens, that's just phenomenal. So because Breath of Fury does have that cool interaction, it probably does put it above other extra combat spells for me. Everyone likes attacking. This is a really cool card. It is probably due for a reprint at some point soon, but Breath of Fury is very cool. Very solid card. I think that means for us today, it's going to be a B. Ooh. Next up, we have a good one. This is one of my favorite cards of all time. Next up, we have A Life from the Loam. It is 1 and a green for a sorcery. Return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand. Dredge 3. Mwah, God's perfect card. This is generally one of my favorite cards of all time. It just does so many things that I want in all formats. What's very important about Life on the Loam is that it's one of the few dredges that reliably puts itself into the graveyard. You can just cast this and it goes straight to the graveyard. All the other creatures, you have to sacrifice them, or they have to die or be discarded. Life on the Loam, you can just cast. It just fuels itself. Because you cast it, you return a fetch land, or in older formats, you return like a wasteland or a strip mine. Next time you would draw a card, probably your upkeep, something like that. You then dredge it back to your hand. You mill stuff into your graveyard. You might be milling some lands that you can then bring back to your hand with Life from the Loam. It is a truly phenomenal card. But also, it's just nice redundancy to your Dark Depths combo. If one of yours gets Wasteland, you have the Life from the Loam to bring back both pieces, because this brings back up to 3 cards. In Commander, I will play this card in any deck that cares about the graveyard. Those decks are always churning stuff into the graveyard. At a base level, this just lets you hit your land drops, while also fueling everything that your deck is wanting. Phenomenal card. Genuinely, this might be my favorite Magic card of all time. It can only be an S. Get in there, Life from the Loam. Mwah. Love it. Just so much. So much. Right, next up we have another green card with Chord of Calling. X green for an instant with Convoke, which means each creature you tap while playing this mana spell reduces its cost by 1 generic, or by 1 mana of that creature's colour. Search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less and put it into play, then shuffle your library. So basically the Convoke lets you turn all your creatures into mana dorks to help you cast this spell, so you can go and find something truly huge. Chord of Calling is just a really cool, really versatile creature tutor. If you're in a deck with creatures and probably combos, then you're probably going to consider Chord of Calling as one of the options out there, especially if you're in a format where a lot of the other options are banned or haven't been printed yet. Like, this is definitely below things like Green Sun Zenith and Natural Order in terms of power level, but it is still a very cool card. Obviously in Modern you have things like Yawgmoth combo where it can go and get one of your pieces. I'm sure there's some combos with this in Pioneer that I don't really understand. The fact it's on Arena means it can probably see play in Squirrel Twin, which spits out a lot of creatures early in the game. It is a very, very good card. I do think those formats would run other options if they were legal. I'm thinking things like Green Sun Zenith specifically. The card's banned in Modern because it's also a ramp spell as well, because you can go get Dryad Arbor as well on turn 1. That interaction is cool. I like that. Chord of Calling, nice card, very fun. It's only going to be a C for me today, if I'm honest with you. It's good, it's fun, it just doesn't excite me, you know? At number 4, we have Dark Confidant, or as it's better known, Bob. So Bob is a 1 and a black for a 2/1 creature human wizard. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. You lose life equal to its converted mana cost. Bob has been a cornerstone of grindy value decks ever since it was printed. It is just so good at getting you additional value over the course of the game. It asks you so little, just play it on turn 2 and don't have anything massive in your deck. Having said that, I'm pretty sure Jund players were still jamming this when Gurmag Angler was printed, so, it does say greatness at any cost, so I guess sometimes you might end up 7ing yourself. I know I've run this in a reanimated deck in Cube before and done myself 8 off of a Grizzlebrand, but that's kind of part of playing Bob, and that's kind of the magic of the card. I'm assuming this can't see much Commander play nowadays. It is a very good card, but it's always been slightly too pricey for people to try out in Commander. And also there, you're generally running higher costed spells, so you are more likely to 7 and 8 yourself than in a deck where you've built around the confines of Bob. I'm thinking specifically Modern Jund, that kind of thing, where your curve stops at 3 or 4. In terms of vibes though, Bob, played fairly, is just a good, boring value card. But because you can 8 yourself off of it, if you're playing a true hero, that means that it's going to go in the A for me. Right, coming in at number 3, we're cheating a little bit. We have the Shocklands, originally found in this set. Specifically in Ravnica, we had Sacred Foundry, Watery Grave, Temple Garden, and Overgrown Tomb. The other 6 would come in the other sets in the block. What needs to be said about Shocklands that people haven't already said before? They're probably the 3rd or 4th best land cycle ever printed. Obviously, number 1, I'm going to say Fetch Land. Number 2, Original Jewels. These are probably 3rd, but you could argue just because of the utility of them in certain formats and things like Cube, that Triomes could now have replaced them. But in any 60-card constructed format where you really care about them coming into play untapped, they are probably just a solid 3rd there. These are true staples of formats. When you think of Modern, you generally think of fetch land into Shockland. And then in Commander, for most of us, like original jewels are kind of way too expensive. They're out of reach of possibilities. These are kind of like the epitome of having a good mana base. These and the fetch lands are kind of the cards that you are like attaining to try and get. Like the fact that these are staples in every format where original jewels aren't printed is a testament to just how good they are. And the fact that I'm pretty sure a card like Watery Grave still sees legacy play because there is a Death Shadow deck that cares about you losing 2 life is just another thing in these cards' favour. I will be honest, I'm not going to put these as high as a lot of people probably think I'm going to. And the reason for that is purely availability and cost. So many players, so many decks want these cards. And if I'm honest, they're just not reprinted at the level that I think they should be. For context, when they were making the first Commander Precon, they thought about putting snow jewels in there, like original jewel lands that don't come into play tapped with no drawback, but just make them snow. That's the kind of level they were originally thinking of with Commander. Why in 2024, where Commander decks can cost up to 100 quid now to buy straight from the shop, why can't we have jewel lands in those? Why are they not more readily available? I'm aware this could just be man shouting at Cloud, and I apologize for that. But for me, because of that, these 4 jewels, anyway, are only getting a B. Moving on to number 2 now, we have Cloudstone Curio. It is 3 generic for an artifact. Whenever a non-artifact permanent comes into play under your control, you may return another permanent you control that shares a permanent type with it to its owner's hand. So this card is pricey primarily because it's only had 4 printings. We have the first one here in original Ravnica. The next one was an invention, which doesn't really count as a reprint. And then it was a box topper in the Lord of the Rings set. It being upshifted to Mythic in the Ravnica Remastered might not help it too much, but the reprint is at least something so people can get their hands on it. Why this card is played is primarily because of combos. There is an absolute bucket load of combos. There's no way I'm going over all of them here. The gist with these is that generally at a minimum you're making like infinite enter the battlefield triggers. The way you're doing that will vary depending on what the pieces are, but generally speaking, you have Cloudstone Curio, you play a thing, it bounces it while making some mana, that then lets you replay the thing. How you kill people after that? There's going to be plenty of ways, either with like a Perforos that will ping people for damage when a creature comes into play. I'll put a link down to the Cloudstone Curio combo page on MTG Decks. It has about 250 for you to have a look through. In terms of the rating, however, I'm a bit torn where to put this. It's a very cool card, but I feel that combo could get a little bit boring. Like, it feels a little bit like Gave, like you might just be tripping over your combo at any point in a game. If you're in more competitive play groups, that's very cool, but it's my list and that's not really how I tend to play Magic. So for me, Cloudstone Curio gets the worst rating so far, only gets a D. I'll be honest, part of that might be because I can't be bothered to work out what the combos are. But if you disagree with that, let me know down in the comments. Let your hate fuel the algorithm. I live off it, let's go. But at number 1, the most expensive card from Ravnica City of Guilds, I think we all knew this was coming. Number 1 is Doubling Season. 4 and a green for an enchantment. If an effect would put 1 or more tokens into play under your control, it puts twice that many into play instead. If an effect would place 1 or more counters on a permanent you control, it places twice that many on that permanent instead. So what do I really need to say about Doubling Season? This is just generally speaking one of the most broken cards in all of Commander. It is the epitome of a Commander card. It is a 5 mana, do nothing enchantment by itself. But if you can then follow this up with any spell that gets a bonus from this, you're gonna make your mana back. Why Doubling Season is like the gold standard of these doubling effects in Commander is because it does tokens and counters. Cards like Anointed Procession are super good and super expensive, and they only just do tokens. Doubling Season does both. I remember one of my first games of Commander out in the wild, coming up against a Doubling Season and just having my mind blown at kind of like, well, this does so much. It just makes games of Magic get really, really stupid. And that's before you bring Planeswalkers into the equation. If you have Doubling Season in play, and then you play a Planeswalker, it comes in with double counters, meaning that most of the time you can ultimate the Planeswalker straight away. That is obviously just absurdly stupid. In terms of the ranking, that's where it gets a bit tricky, because this is obviously a very expensive Magic card. Its effect is not as unique as it used to be as well. We have cards that double up tokens, we have cards that double up counters. These are effects that they're printing more and more of now. But because Doubling Season is still the best of all of those effects, means that it is the most expensive card in this set, and one of the most expensive cards that kind of people think about buying when they're playing Commander. I was fortunate enough to get my copy of Doubling Season several years ago, and that was kind of like an achievement moment for me. It was kind of like one of these cards that I'd always wanted because of how dumb and stupid it is. Like trading up or saving for one was a big moment for me. Like it could generally be one of the most iconic cards in all of Commander. Like the cost of the card and the fact that there are other options now available to us means this probably isn't an S anymore. It probably means that Doubling Season is only an A. But honestly, I think A is a fair place for it. Right, but that's the tier list. These are the top 10 most expensive cards from Ravnica City of Guilds. Let me know what you think down in the comments. I will be honest, that copy enchantment in hindsight looks a little high, but we've committed now and that's where it lives. Do make sure you like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Until next time, I'll see you all soon. Goodbye.